Uni Chat, debating the big issues affecting students and providing key advice and tips.
Hello and welcome to the new series of Uni Chat. Now, on the last Uni Chat podcast, we spoke about the election. Of course, we were dealing with, was it going to be Rishi Sunak? Is it going to be Keir Starmer? Lots of students joined in the podcast and gave their views. Some of those views were quite surprising. But of course, one of the hot topics we spoke about was tuition fees. We were asking, should those fees be scrapped? Should they be reduced? Should they be increased? Unsurprisingly, no one thought those fees should be increased. Some thought they should stay as they are. Some people thought they should be scrapped. Now, this was a question that Keir Starmer, the now Prime Minister, was also asked prior to the elections. And here's what he said.
What about university tuition fees then? Will you remain committed to scrapping them in your first term?
Pledges, Andrew. So the answer to these questions is yes.
So university tuition fees being scrapped will be in a Starmer manifesto?
Yes, that's why it's
the next election.
Now roll the clock forward. Now Mr. Starmer is in office. He is the Prime Minister. We've now had the first budget. And guess what's happened? The fees are being increased. We now know that the fees, which were £9,250 per annum, are now going to increase. They're now going to be £9,535 per annum. So here on podcast, the Uni Chat podcast, we've got to ask the question again of you, the students. Is this right? Is this fair? Was there another way of doing it? And before I come to today's panel, let me first ask the president of the National Union of Students, Amira Campbell. Keir Starmer, before he's Prime Minister, he's asked the question, will you be abolishing tuition fees? I think he says, yes. We've just played the clip a moment ago. Roll on time now. He's now the Prime Minister. And we've had this announcement from the Education Secretary that tuition fees will be increased. What's the reaction of the National Union of Students?
I mean, I think it was one for us of real disappointment. But also it came sort of as a bittersweet situation because we had also this news around the maintenance loans happening at the same time. And I think for many young voters who would have voted for Labour to come into power under the belief system that Labour weren't going to do something like a tuition fee rise, this was really disappointing news. The reality is universities are deeply underfunded. We have a terrible system that isn't working for students, isn't working for staff, and isn't working for anyone. And where Labour have an opportunity to do some proper work about coming up with a completely new funding model that would actually work, we've got this sort of patch on a gaping hole. We've got this additional money thrown in through the tuition fee to universities to stop them going broke immediately. But it isn't about actually securing a future for higher education long term. So I think the review really is promising because this promise came as a sort of package. The stuff around maintenance loan is promising, but isn't enough still. We've got students facing real poverty, real challenges right now. And the tuition fee piece feels sort of like crowdfunding for a much bigger issue. And there's a chance for Labour to really turn this around still.
I mean, before I explore this a bit further, I just want to put this into context, though, because I think what a lot of people maybe don't realise is that, number one, this is the first increase we've had in a very long time. I think it's 8 years. But if you look at previous increases, so between 1998 and 2006, the tuition fees went up by £2,000 in that period. And then in between 2006 and 2012, it went up by £3,000. So here we are now, 8 years later. The increase is nowhere near as much as it's been previously. Is it not fair, or do you think we just should have not had no increase at all?
I think it's actually really brilliant that you brought it back to when tuition fees were first introduced in 1998, because they were set at £1,000, and the idea was that the state would contribute 75%, whilst the student contributed 25%. And now we're looking at a model here in 2024 where the state is only contributing 16%. If you compare us to most other sort of OECDs, right, the UK contributes far less as a state to tertiary education than any other country. So we're in a really interesting place where you're right. The tuition fee model that was introduced back then is completely depleted to today when we think about the contribution of the state versus the student. And, we saw those increases in 2006, then you think in 2012, obviously probably one of the most controversial tuition fee increases. where we turned our backs on a model that was first created with a belief, one, in terms of the sort of maintenance piece and the maintenance grant piece that used to exist, right? Where our poorest students wouldn't be overly burdened by debt, but also would be able to survive in terms of cost of living, in terms of rent, food, etc., etc. And now we're in a completely different situation. So I think it's actually, deeply disturbing, the progress and sort of the changes that have happened since 1998 to today.
So I guess what you're saying then is that the state-funded element should be increased. Don't take it out of the pockets of the students, but actually increase the state funding side. Is that your position?
And absolutely. And I mean, this is why we're talking about looking at a new model. I mean, one, I think Labour have an opportunity to look at alternative ways of funding, to look at the ways that they can make it work, because we are in a financially difficult position. But if we continue to take money out of students' pockets and overburden them with debt, make it so that they can't live in the current climate financially, what we're talking about is basically saying that we don't care about students being able to be students.
And of course, that's central to all of this. And every time we do a Uni Chat podcast and money comes up, this subject comes up. And when we spoke about this a few months ago on this podcast about how difficult it is for students. But the other interesting thing for me is that, so I think you phrased this in a statement from the NUS that effectively this amounts to £5 a week extra for students, which actually is a lot of money for a student. But here's what's more interesting, is that when you look at what this does for each university, I've seen it's actually not a lot. It doesn't actually add a lot to them financially. So it impacts the student far more than it benefits the university. That seems to be the position so far as I can see it. Do you share that thought?
Absolutely. And you can talk to any university leader, you talk to so many people. That money is massive money for students. It's really, really real. But for universities, they know that this is not going to cover the costs long term. And with the recent news around national insurance, they're going to be even more concerned about the financial viability of their institutions going forward. So we're talking about, I mean, if anyone knows that the funding system doesn't work, number one, it's students, because they get hit the hardest. Number two, it's our staff who face casualisation and poor wages. And then number three, it's our universities themselves who can't offer the same services that they wish they could. You know, teaching is the number one priority, and they have incredible academics left, right, and centre across their institutions who just aren't getting paid the way that they deserve to be.
I mean, talking about students, one of the things that really shocked me, actually, I was looking at one of your surveys, an NUS survey that said that 14% of students, I think as undergraduates, have used a food bank.
Yeah, and that's actually doubled since 2022. And we've also got about 36% of students avoiding putting on their heating during the winter months. I mean, the continual stats around and stories around what students are going through, they're harrowing and they're disturbing, and they speak to how systemic the issues are.
So really, I mean, the other thing I've seen lots of people say is that this whole increase in tuition fees is putting a plaster on a much, much bigger problem. As I said, it's creating a problem for the students, not necessarily solving the issue. So if you had a message for government, I mean, you have got a message for government, that's what you're here to do. But if you were able to stare down the lens and talk to Keir Starmer, who clearly did a big U-turn on this subject now, what would you tell him to do?
Well, I mean, I think it's reassuring that they have that review. And I think with that review, the number one thing they need to do is talk to the right people. Be in the room, having the conversations with students, with the NUS, with student unions, with universities, with all of the bodies that are really, really involved and are being hit the hardest by this. Two, I think that anything to do with access, I mean, Labour have said sort of in their opportunity mission that access is their number one priority. Cost is a massive barrier to access. And if we don't look at cost effectively and properly, that's going to really, really stop Labour from being able to do that sort of social mobility, social justice piece that they're passionate about. And then thirdly, I think we need to think about the rhetorics that we hold as sort of a UK nation and how that affects our institutions. You know, universities host populations of students from all across the world, right? And often it's our international students who are facing some of the most horrible experiences at university and a lot of the many, many challenges. And as we have a funding model that fails our universities, the exploitation of our international students increases and increases. Partner that with a largely sort of racist and anti-migrant rhetoric happening and spreading across this country, we really need to think about making sure that we support our migrant students in this country properly.
One last quick question I wanted to ask you. Lots of universities that I've spoken to about this subject have fairly much echoed some of what you've said there. And I think there is a general feeling that more has to be done, of course, for funding, because they need more funding, but more has to be done by government. But many universities have also said to me that they are creating tomorrow's workforce. They are helping industry. They think that industry should put their hands in their pockets and invest more in universities as well. It's an interesting concept. Some universities say it's happening already. Is that something you've thought about? What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, I think NUS haven't explored this avenue of a funding model for higher education as of yet. But I think instinctively, I think that's something we need to think about in terms of what we consider the value of higher education to be as a country, right? And if we pin all of the weight and value on higher education on employability prospects, and I think we've forgotten what the value of education is to our country. In many senses, yeah, our students do become the workforce of the country, but they also become thinkers, they become academics, they become people that allow us to shift the way that we think and allow us to think differently about the future of our world. And that might not necessarily turn out to translate into loads of money or into growing, booming businesses that lift up our economy. And so if we drive our value of higher education solely on sort of monetary value, rather than the social value and contribution that higher education gives. I mean, I was on a panel yesterday at the Festival of Higher Education, where actually one of the leaders at UCAS was talking about how higher education is proven to lead people to live longer lives and happier lives, right? Let's think about the social impact that higher education has and make sure we do a fair contribution from the state because we invest in that and we care about that.
Thanks very much, Amira. No doubt we'll come back to this. I know this is going to be something which goes on lots and lots. So I look forward to speaking to you again about this. I'm joined now by Nathan White, who is the UEA Student Union Welfare Officer, and of course, has lots to say about this. Good morning, Nathan.
Morning. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. So we've had this news about the tuition increase. It's not welcome news. I think you've seen at the start of the podcast, we played a clip of Keir Starmer a while ago saying he will be abolishing tuition fees, not putting them up. Now we have this U-turn. How is this impacting on students? I mean, you're speaking to students every day. What's the feeling?
I mean, throughout my time at UEA, I've been there since 2020, and the situation just seems to be getting worse and worse for students. I think the tuition fee increase is part of a wider problem, and that stems mainly from the lack of increase to maintenance loan. And so it's kind of disappointing to see an increase in both, but not one that's substantial impact on either. It's, students are in abject poverty, and it's really difficult to see. And because the students before them kind of were in a similar situation, they just accept it. Whereas in reality, you should be able to go to university in the UK without forfeiting, your right to heat your house, or to, occasionally have a nice meal instead of buying like Asda essentials every week. Because that's what we're looking at. Students, they're surviving, they're not living. And a whole part of university is getting that experience and enjoying yourself. And I think that's kind of been forgotten and put on the wayside because of the lack of finance that they have received.
Are you hearing stories of students dropping out because of this? They just can't afford to carry on.
It's definitely come up. I don't know of any specific students that have actually got that far, but as soon as it gets to that level, we know it's pretty serious and we get the university involved. But it's a real consideration for a lot of students, Equally, I think the alternative is a lot of students have decided that, well, instead of staying at university the whole year, I'll only come back during term time. So we've seen a big drop-off in students in December and January. And then after May, when their exams are done, campus is just empty until September. Obviously, as the Students' Union, we don't like to see that because it means that, again, they're not getting that student experience and they're just returning home. It's almost like they're going to like a summer camp instead of university.
Yeah. One of the things I wonder is that, of course, the reason for the increase in tuition fees is that there is effectively a financial crisis in higher education, in our universities. They need more money.
Yeah.
Government seems to think this is the way to do it. I think I've heard the expression people perhaps they're crowdfunding to prop up universities. Of course, it's not the right way to go. But one of the things I wonder is it's creating lots of horror stories of students who can't afford to eat or heat. They can't do both at the same time. They can't afford university. They're going home, as you said, more times than they would have been previously. Is there a chance that what will happen is this will put off tomorrow's students? Is there a chance we'll see less people going to university because of this? And if that's the case, isn't actually this increase actually going to be a disservice? It's going to mean that less students in the future, there's less money going in. Actually, it's counterproductive.
Oh, absolutely. And, I think a good parallel to draw with this is where it shows that government action or government inaction does actually impact how many students universities get, is that a lot of institutions have seen a real drop-off in international students after the Conservative government changed policy around bringing families to the UK and made visa restrictions harder. These things, even if you're not going to be impacted by them, they set the tone. And if you've got a government saying, well, either that we don't particularly want international students coming over here, or that we don't care enough to fund your education properly, that sends a message to students whether or not it will actually have a real impact on them. So yeah, I think there will be students that are put off by this, absolutely.
When the decision was made to increase the tuition fees, do you think government either understood or took the time to try and understand what the impact would actually be on students?
I think they did, and I think that's why they've gone for this £250 initial increase, or just over £250 initial increase, instead of going for what was the expectation in the higher education sector, which was that it was going to increase to about £13,000 a year. I think they are acutely aware of the problems that students are facing. However, I think we all know that Keir Starmer's government has got to make up for quite a few financial mistakes from the last government. So they're really, they understand, and it's good to know that. But equally, if they're not putting in the actions to help us.
It feels like to me they were looking for a very, very quick solution to a much bigger problem than what that quick solution was going to deal with. So it seems silly. I mean, we've seen similar decisions like the winter fuel allowance. The other end of the pensioners losing out with a very quick decision that did not look well thought through. Finally, Nathan, what's your message to government now? What should they do?
I think I'd say go back to their roots. In 1998, there was it was the Labour government that changed higher education and made it so much more accessible to students. And I think they have the opportunity to change and transform the system now. How they'll do that, is up to them. But I'd encourage them to go for a system that doesn't saddle students with debt that increases year on year, and just do something that is good for students. Because at the end of the day, like I said, we're the workforce of the future, but we're also the voters of the future too.
So you mean more state funding, less students putting their hand in the pocket, basically?
Absolutely.
Great. Nathan, no doubt we'll talk again about this as it rumbles on. Hopefully, maybe with some good news that they did a U-turn, but let's not hold our breath.
Fingers crossed.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Nathan. No doubt this is going to rumble on and on, so we'll get back to you and talk to you again about this soon, no doubt. Now, if you want to join in the discussion, join in the chat here on Uni Chat, go to our website, www.unichatpodcast.co.uk. That's www.unichatpodcast.co.uk. You'll find all the information you need to be able to either submit your comments, submit your views, or to join us live here on a podcast as part of our student panel, which is where I'm going now, because now we are joined by this week's panel to discuss their views. What do they think about this increase in tuition fees? Good afternoon, everybody. To many, it's been a shock. Tuition fees have increased. It's shock because, as we've shown already, Keir Starmer a number of months ago said, when he was asked the question, will you abolish tuition fees? He said, yes, I will. It was very clear. Now we are a little time up the road and tuition fees have not been abolished. Instead of that, they have been increased. Hummer, we're told it's going to impact on students to the tune of £5 per week. What's your view on this?
Sure. My view on this is that it's not fair, because if you go beneath the surface, there's a lot more questions than this £5 increase per person has raised. It doesn't impact everybody equally. The working class students who are already very debt adverse as a group might see this as another barrier to higher education, because for them, it's not about tuition fees, but the lifetime burden of repayment. When we look at this across the channel, the UK model appears even more grotesque because Germany offers free tuition even to international students. France charges a pittance, and these systems recognise public education as a public good rather than a private commodity. But in the UK, we seem to be saddling students with debt, and we have some of the weakest students' rights groups in the whole of Europe. It's definitely also not fair to charge more to home students for less, or for this sense of not communicating how the increase in fees is also going to help the universities provide a higher standard of education. And it's also not fair for international students, which I'm sure we'll touch on soon.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting with you, if international students, because what I think not everyone realizes is that they, of course, pay, I think, is up to 4 times more than a domestic student. Therefore, they are very important for universities in relation to cash flow and to funding. But here we have a situation where this year we've seen a big decline in international students. That trend may increase. Pedram, do you think we should be concerned about that?
Yes, we definitely should. The way the government has been treating international students as a cash cow, the first moment you step foot in the UK, you're paying significant amounts for rent, for university. Those university fees are sometimes 4 times. In some courses, for example, medicine at Cambridge is £80,000, while home students pay 9,000. So on average, we're paying at least 3 times more. And there's a lot of costs involved with the visa. And it feels like the rhetoric the government uses alongside the cost, the money that they're taking from us, it's not a welcoming atmosphere. And if you all international students feel the same way, they feel like they've been limited, they cannot bring independence anymore. And as a result, other destinations like Australia that has better weather, Canada, US, which has better universities, provide an alternative for these students. And more, they're going to those universities where they feel like they can build a life there, not only just study there. So I think this trend will continue and is only beginning. And I think if the government listens to the voices of international students, they would have heard that perspective before it happened. I talked to Matt Western. There was a meeting he held with the students. Matt Western is the Minister for Universities, I believe. I asked him, have you considered the student voice for international students, and are they involved in any way in the decision making? He said he has never considered it before. I mean, if this minister is not considering, if the government is not considering international students, if you have no part in the discussion, well, of course the policies they're going to make are not going to be favorable to international students, or even consider their perspectives. And what that ends up happening is we have international students leaving the country, and then now you have universities that are more reliant on British students. Well, as they should be. That's my belief, that they should be, because it's a British university. Why is most of its tuition fees coming from Nigerian students, Indian students, Iranian students, and investments from China? I mean, how can we call this a British university if you're taking money from all over the world?
I mean, you mentioned the word considered a number of times, and I think it's a good word to use, because it appears to me that the decision that's been made here has been a knee-jerk reaction to increased tuition fees. I've said it a few times today on this podcast. It's a solution to a much bigger problem. So it's a plaster. It's not going to fix the problem. And the reason I mentioned the word considered is that it appears that, have they even considered what this means to students? Did they consider the impact? I've already used the analogy earlier in the podcast with the winter fuel payments, cuts with pensioners. Clearly, they did not think about what the impact would be. I think it's the same here. They didn't really think what the impact here would be as well. I mean, what do you think? I mean, Hummer, you've gone through university. What's the real impact to a student hearing that student fees are going to increase? What does it do to you mentally? What does it do to your mental well-being?
To my mental well-being and to students across the country, I think it would put a lot more strain on them, because this recent decision to increase the tuition fees really does appear to be a short-term fix instead of a comprehensive solution to these underlying systematic problems and financial challenges in the whole of the higher education sector. A relatively small increase for the sector, even though to parents and to students, the full cost of $9,535 sounds like a huge amount, but we need to have a really honest discussion within the public about the crisis that's happening under the covers in higher education, with redundancy patterns happening within universities going through mergers, considerations about whether we decrease the number of courses that are offered to students, especially with recent discussions from politicians referring to Mickey Mouse degrees, because the courses that we're looking at don't have a desirable impact on students in terms of their employability rate. The fee is exacerbating the financial strain that students are already experiencing in the cost of living crisis. Also, the adjustment for maintenance loans for working class backgrounds isn't offered as a grant in previous years. It's still set as a loan, which many people see as a debt that they have to pay back rather than an investment into their education and their careers. And when employers are looking at degrees now, it seems that they're looking more for skills that you've gained out of the degree rather than having the prestige and the privilege of having a degree, and that's something that's in and of itself is going to get you a job. I think there's a wider discussion that the politicians and the higher education sector need to have an open and transparent conversation with each other about the financial sustainability of the universities, because it's not a financially sustainable model to be relying so heavily on international students to counteract the fees that are to prop up the fees needed for home students and for research projects and grants. And we've also got universities, despite potentially getting an additional 390 million from this increase for home students, we need to also consider the recent contributions that universities as employers need to make for additional national insurance contributions that the government has recently put in. So I think this is a big warning sign that, as you said, is a plaster, not a solution to these underlying structural issues. We need to discuss the financial sustainability of universities, because the net benefit to universities is very modest. And whether this is a potential deterrent to prospective students, which can be very worrying.
Well, I think it is. I mean, we've spoken to many potential students or who should be future students and asked them, what do you think about going to university? Is that going to be your natural next step? And it seems to be lots of people are saying they're worried about being saddled with debts. They're worried about surviving during university. They're worried about their mum and dads being able to afford them to go to university. So I think you're right. Many people are saying that actually maybe they won't go. But one of the things I wanted to raise with you is that back in 1998, we had a Labour government, and the state of tuition fees then was that there were £1,000, but a far bigger share was funded by the state, far bigger state-funded proportion. And that looked like a much better model back in 98. And then here we are, we wind on many, many years later, it's a totally different model. The increase is actually not a lot in the scheme of things, but do you think what they should have done is increase the state-funded side of it so that students actually paid less? Would that have been a better way forward?
I think absolutely. We should have a model that's more similar to the Australian and New Zealand model, where potentially graduates based on their employment as it increases, we get a proportionate tax that's then paid to the government rather than it's seen as a debt. Or we can have a model like one that you spoke about, like the previous 98 model, where the government pays more into the university sector. But for either of those to happen, either the public funding from tax or from the government funding and allocating a bigger share, universities need to convincingly articulate what students are paying for and how the fee increase is going to improve the student experience and outcomes, which is not what's happening at the moment.
Pedram, what else do you think this government could do now? I mean, it's increased tuition fees. What else could it do to balance this and make this feel fairer to students, but also go a bit further towards solving the financial crisis?
Definitely. The idea, I think it's not a sustainable approach for such a big percentage of the budget of the government to be spent on education and then increasing that. I feel like every solution to any problem in the UK is the government has to pay for it, but the government has to pay for a lot of things. Which ones are we going to sacrifice? And they've already sacrificed a lot. The councils are going bankrupt. So how much money do we have? And I think it's time to be honest with ourselves that the UK is not a rich country anymore. Our GDP is falling, and to be realistic with what we can expect from the government to give. But in terms of what the government can do, I don't think it's realistic that it will go to 1998 model or to even discuss that abolishing tuition fees. I think Keir Starmer mentioned that in order to get votes. I don't think he had any intention delivering that because everyone knows that's not possible. I worked in the higher education system, and we could see that we are in desperate need of funding, and we know the government can afford it. On the point of what the government can do now, there's one point that I think is being missed here is in the UK, we have the top 1%, we have the top 5% of citizens who make a lot of income. They pay the same amount as the working class for their tuition fees. Why is there a cap of 9,250 for them? Wouldn't it be fair, instead of asking foreign students to be financing, the tuition fees and helping balance out the lack of funding coming from home students, wouldn't it be better for that money to be coming from the richer British citizens? Shouldn't they be paying more based on their class, based on their income? And 9,250 for everyone, a blanket one, I don't think is a well thought out system. And I don't know if this other system has been thought out before. But now this raises a very important point. What's the responsibility of the top 1%, of the richest of the British public? What can they do to support? We have heard news more and more how they're funneling the monies outside. They're going to Dubai, they're going to Cayman Islands. We have record numbers of millionaires leaving the UK. A lot of these are British citizens. They have to be held into account. If they want their kids to go to a British university, why are they only paying 9,250?
It's an interesting debate. Now, of course, we know that fees are increasing. We know what the state of play there is. But do you think, we've seen lots of messages coming into Uni Chat from students saying that they're worried about these fee increases. They're not sure how they're going to survive. How will I make ends meet? These are all the words we're seeing. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to afford to stay at university. So my question for you on that, and Hamar, I'll come to you first, is are students being helped enough? Are they being given enough guidance on how to manage their finances?
I think the very simple answer is no, because there's not much of a discussion or minimum standard setting when it comes to the regulatory bodies, when it comes to the university responsibility outside formal education, when it comes to managing finance, setting up with other life skills like managing your budget, understanding banks, and navigating all of these more complex issues. And as university is now being seen as the natural next step for the majority of the population, universities need to have a more smooth transition model that's more consistently applied. Because if you're paying the same amount, 9,200, 9,500, to go to a Russell Group university, which gives you a really comprehensive package from sixth form or college into your first year of university, where they're telling you exactly how to set things up. You're going to go stay in halls. You're going to have a relatively small lecture size. You're going to have a lot of one-to-one communication with a career guidance or counsellor. You've got a lot of mental health support to alleviate any concerns. You've got career advice to get a second job to support you. That university experience of that student in a Russell Group university is vastly different to someone at De Montfort University or Arden University or any of these other pre-polytechnic colleges that are now universities, because they're paying the same amount, but the irony is we're getting very different levels of experience for the students. And that's why the university as a sector needs to realise what is the best approach, what's best practice, and what's the minimum standard that is appropriate. And I think the government is in a really good position with this new support that they've added in for universities to actually demand that there needs to be a higher level of support for students rather than just handing out this check without asking for anything in return for the student body, it seems.
Pedram, what do you think? I mean, what else can we do to, if government cannot put its hand in its pocket and financially support the students, what else could we do to help students through difficult times and to budget?
Definitely what Huma mentioned about helping finding some training, providing some training that can help students learn how to manage their finances would be super helpful. Just anecdotal evidence from my experience at university, I saw a lot of students complaining that their maintenance loan was not enough. But then I see them spending it on the most expensive clothes, and I don't really blame them because they're just starting off. This is the first time they're handling their own finances, and it's difficult and needs to be some training, but there also needs to be some personal responsibility. This idea that if someone's worried, we always have to help them. What society would that make? What type of students are we making in real life? You are going to have a mortgage for your house. It's going to be stressful. They have to be ready for that world in front of them. But if we provide so much cover for them, they cannot fall. They cannot be ever in a position where they don't have money. How will they learn to be resilient? And if people are bringing people to the university and taking them out, and you want to make them ready for the workforce, this is not how we do it. If they're worried, we have to let them fail sometimes, because that's how you build resilient students.
Can I jump in there? I think we should see the university as a system which supports people to become resilient. However, we need to also have a net at the bottom to catch those who fall, especially for disadvantaged people, potentially from working class backgrounds or marginalised background, who might lack financial resources to navigate this sudden lifestyle change and higher education efficiently. So yes, innovation and resilience and personal responsibility over your finances is extremely important. And it's also a very, it's an experience that can give you autonomy and self-determination, which is a really important experience for some people. However, on the other side of the coin, in terms of practical support for students that's out there, I think sometimes universities need to require workshops or online courses for budgeting. Universities could also direct students to financial workshops. I know of Money Supermarket online and other websites that are very credible. So quick searches there, asking the university for to partner with financial advice organizations can also be very helpful. There are local financial advice organizations as well. There's also quite a few cost-saving measures on campus, but it varies from university to university. And you don't want to say it. You don't want to be advising students that there are food banks available. You can get secondhand textbooks. You can get energy-efficient housing and affordable meal plans, because it doesn't feel like that's what you should be going to university for. You should be going to university with the basic necessities covered so that you can then focus on getting the best out of the education. So now as we're moving towards this more holistic personal experience of living out by yourself, the university experience has changed. And I think the government needs to catch up to that a little bit as well.
I should say, I think the reality is that for most people that go to university undergraduate, a number of things happen for the first time. So for the first time, they move out of home and move into accommodation, which costs money. For the first time, they have to do their own shopping. For the first time, they have to cook their own food. For the first time, they have to, many don't do this, but they should be budgeting. So for the first time, they've effectively got to manage their money. And I think the problem is, for many students that I speak to, especially those who have just transitioned to university, no one tells them how to do that. So when you look at the whole situation where university starts costing more money and you cross that over with, and you don't know how to manage your money in the first place, it's a perfect storm. Hence why I asked you that question, because many people I ask just say, well, no one told me how to budget. No one told me how to manage my money. And it seems to be that's the message from everyone. Pedro, sorry, you were going to say something.
Yeah. Just on your point, Dean. The question is who is responsible for teaching those kids these lessons, and it should. And we have 2 points here. Either it's the government or it's the families.
Or universities.
I think it's the parents, and we are missing out this conversation. We never mentioned the responsibility of parents. If the students in the UK are getting a maintenance loan covered, the parents are not in a financial burden financially in terms of supporting their kids. Where is the parents' responsibility in this? In Iran, we have a big culture of people saving their money so that their kid could get their best education. Is that the culture here? Or are the parents forgetting and neglecting their own children? Moving out of home, cooking your own food, budgeting are things your parents should teach you, not Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer is not your dad. And it's very important to be very clear with that it's the parents' responsibility. And if the parents are failing the kids, we need to be doing something about that. And it's not always the solution to have the government or the university being responsible for this.
I think the problem, Pedro, with that is that, first of all, I think education, certainly in this country, has always been seen as a partnership between the parent, the child, or adult in this case, and the education, the institution, whether it be a school or a university. But I think the problem is, if you just say it's always the parents, not every student that goes to university has parents. Some don't. Not every student that goes to university has parents with means or parents that actually care enough to do things. Those are the people that would be left out if we had a system where it was all put on the parents. I understand the concept of what you're saying. Of course, I do. My own view is I think the parents should also take some responsibility, like you were saying. But I do think that there is a duty of care at the university level to make sure that the students that study at their institution are geared up enough, are equipped with not only the tools they need to study, but also with the experiences, the life experience and everything else. We speak to many universities, and it amazes me that some universities say, yep, we've got all this support, we've got money guiders, as they call it, and others don't have anything at all. And it should be the same across the board, is my view.
Yeah, I would definitely echo what you're saying about parents who aren't able or sometimes don't want to. I unfortunately came from a similar background with parents who weren't supportive or not there. And it means that some children or young people only have the system available to support them. And to make sure that everybody has access to an equitable system that works, you have the institution, in this case, the university, and the government able to assist. So there could be government-led programs or government-mandated programs within the university. But at the moment, the university is just seeing these financial literacy programs as an added bonus that students don't really care about attending. And we need to change the discussion to actually all students are now suddenly getting a huge maintenance grant suddenly in their bank account, and they have to budget and make that work for the entire semester and factor in paying bills and think long term, which many people might not have had to do before. And if people have a parent who is able to support them and give them guidance, then that's an additional fantastic boost for those people. But I think the focus should be on a system that works for everybody and catches those people in the net that fall. I don't think we should see financial literacy as a luxury that is accessible only to people in Russell Group universities or universities that have managed to secure funding. I think it needs to be seen as a survival skill, and that universities do have a duty of care. When we get into this duty of care discussion, it becomes really interesting, because then if a student falls to predatory loan sharks or scams, is the university, who is then educating students on financial literacy, for example, is the university then liable to cover the costs and reimburse the student for falling foul to predators financially? Or is it then only up to the student to manage this area? Because I think that's something that's then going to become a bigger area of debate if we then say the universities do have this duty of care.
It's an interesting debate. And the reason why it's a debate is because there's actually no guidance on this subject. There is no law, rule, regulation that actually sets if a university has a duty of care. Of course it does, but what that duty is and how far it goes. And you're right, it is another very big discussion for another Uni Chat podcast on another day. But it's a very interesting one, which crosses into many areas, including this one. I think what's clear is that before the last budget, before the government's last budget, universities were in a financial crisis. We've had the budget. Universities are still in a financial crisis. Nothing has been solved. The only thing that's happened is that students have been saddled with more debt to the tune of £5 per week. So people are telling us. I think the general consensus is that was not necessarily the solution. It may have been one of the solutions, but many other things had to happen. Really appreciate your views. We could have spoken about this all day, all of tomorrow, and all of next week, and we still wouldn't have finished because it's that big a subject. And we will come back to it here on Uni Chat, but I appreciate both of your thoughts and your own experiences. So thank you very much for that. So we know we've got tuition fee increases coming. We know this is going to cause more headaches, more problems for students who are going to now probably struggle even more than they have been with their finances. So I'm pleased to be joined now by Tynah Matembe, who is a finance expert and from the website Matix, to explain how you budget, how you deal with not knowing how much you've got to spend and budgeting to make sure your money stretches even further. Good morning, Tynah.
Good morning. So nice to see you, Dean.
Nice to see you too. So today on the podcast, we are talking all about money. Specifically, Tynah, we've been talking about the announcement that tuition fees are to go up. Lots of people are unhappy. We've been asking the National Union of Students what they think about that. You can imagine what the answer was. We've been talking to students about it as well. Some think it's okay, some don't. It's been a very thorny subject, but there's another issue linked to all of this, and forgetting the tuition fees for a moment, which is how do students manage their money? And of course, lots of students have been messaging us in at Uni Chat, and a lot of those messages are about this subject when they knew that we would be speaking to yourself. And Tynah, I'm going to go straight to a question because it really sums this all up. And Wendy from Bristol University asks, she says, help, I started at university in September and my finances are already a mess. How do I manage my money so I do not overspend and so my grant lasts me for the term? I mean, I think that's the $1 million question. How do you do it?
It's the absolute $1 million question. Very good question, Wendy. I think the fast and boring thing to say is that you have to budget. That's just the basics. Is you have to budget. You have to know what money is coming in and where your money is going. But one of the things I say is try and make technology work for you. We're in a space now where there are so many apps that can help. So you just have to sit down every so often, set automations up and do that sort of thing and budget. I have a philosophy, and when we're doing our money coaching, we teach something called the 70-10-10-10 rule. And what that is, Wendy, is that you shouldn't be spending more than 70% of your money anyway, right? And 70% should include everything, your living expenses, your anything that you want to take out of your school books, all that sort of thing. And then you should have 10% that you'll setting aside for when something happens, when you have an emergency, you have an app you need to buy. Suddenly you have an issue at university immediately that has to be dealt with. You need to have another 10% that's in savings. So it's earning you a bit of interest, but it's easy to get to. And then you should have 10% that's invested. So your money should always be doing those 4 things and with no more than 70% being spent. So you do need to budget, but there's ways to ease it up. And Dean, one of the things I like to say is think about what that 70% looks like for you. Write down your budget and then set up a standing order that sweeps the 30% of your account immediately. So that you don't have to think about, oh my goodness, have I gone over this month? Have I not? No. Take off the extra money as soon as it comes, have a standing order, it takes it away, and that's very helpful.
I can almost hear people saying, what about maybe the 20% for the socializing? Which do you eat or do you drink or do you put the heating on? I mean, these are all the things. I wanted to ask you, so I've seen reference to money guiders.
Yes.
Well, can you explain that?
Yes. So money guiders are trained financial support advisors, really. And at many universities, you can go to them and they'll give you some personalized advice based on your own circumstances. So they're a bit like a money coach. But when they're in the universities, they're specifically helping you with managing your student money. So they'll tell you the things about your student loan and they're very useful to go to, actually. They'll tell you any other grants or funds that you have access to. They'll give you some perks, like, are you using uni days to get discounts off your staff, uni days, student beans, these types of sites. They really help you to optimize your money. I would always advise everybody, even if you don't think it's for you, look for one and go even for just one session and then make an informed decision of whether or not money guidance is for you. But they're really essentially there to help you with your budgeting, accessing any emergency funds in the university, understanding the grants you have, because there are also some other grants within the university that you sometimes don't know about, and even advising on things, as micro as your rent, debt issues. They're really valuable and often a resource that you can reach out to. You can ask anyone, your student council or anyone, and get to one, decide if it's for you.
So you mentioned about at the start is about budgeting. Of course, that's something you need to do. And you mentioned about technology work for you. So are there apps there which will assist you with creating budgets?
Yes, there's so many apps just out there right now. I like to say that because there's so many apps around, it's better for you to do a lot of searching and understanding, right? It shouldn't take you too long, but these are the things I would say to look out for. One, make sure you never have just one bank account. That's the beginning of all trouble, because if your grant is coming into the same account that you're using to buy your groceries and the same account you're using to go out at night, things can quickly get mixed up. So have at least 2 bank accounts. One of them should be a savings, ideally, that is earning some interest for all intents and purposes. That's the first thing. The second thing is, these days the banks are getting better and better. So check what your actual existing account already has. Some of them have things called where you can sweep any extra money and put it onto a different account. You can choose to do that, where you round up your change, and that's such a good facility. Last year, I racked up about £300 in roundups, because how it works is, once your account has that roundup function, you basically go to the store or you're in the pub and you spend £7.17 on a pint, let's say, for you and your friends. It will take the extra pennies that go up to £8 and put them into this other account, this sweeper account. It rounds up your change. It's called rounding up your change. You'll be surprised how much you round up if you do that. So it's a very small micro habit, but it will help encourage you to do that. So look at what your current account is offering in terms of standing orders, roundup options. Some accounts have different pots where you can put your money, the 70, 10, 10, 10. You can do that in the same account. Look at that first. And then the second most important thing is automating your habits. So if you're going to follow the 70, 10, 10, 10 method, the first thing is, you don't want to have more than 70% of your money in your current account. So have a standing order that sweeps that to another account, and then you go on to do other things. So it's a bit of an exercise, but it can be fun, check out all the websites, look at the different parks, and optimize your own existing accounts.
So it's basically so you don't get tempted to spend it, is what you mean. Put it out of reach. Put it
Yes.
somewhere else where it's going to be more difficult to spend. I mean, it sounds like a good idea, actually.
You need to put as much space between you and your money. You know, I always say, even when you have a big expense, you know, you have the fridge is broken down, don't buy a replacement that day. Or your bike, you ride to school and the bike's broken down. Spend a few days thinking about, right, what happens if I don't have this bike? What are the options? So that you sleep on it, you make better decisions. When you do things in the heat or at the moment when the money is too close to you, you're spending it all.
On my radio show on LBC that I do every week, one of the things I tell, and of course that's a consumer show where I'm advising people on their rights, but one of the things I tell listeners is when you're going to buy goods or services, always use a credit card because it comes with lots of natural protection, i.e. what we call Section 75. Now, lots of people have been messaging in about this topic saying, I'm a student, should I be using a credit card? Let me tell you one particular question. So I've got Ian from Portsmouth University. He asks, should I get a credit card? Will this help me get by financially and will it help my credit rating? I mean, it's surprising that students are thinking about their credit rating. Should they be thinking about their credit rating?
They absolutely should. That's a fantastic question. And the sooner you think about these things, the better. I would say about credit cards is you really need to understand your money personality. It's really important. Make sure that you're going to do the things we've talked about just now, automate your repayments because you want to pay them back in full. They're absolutely, to answer his question, yes, they absolutely help you to build up your credit, but you want to do it properly. You want to do it in a way that's helpful. So for students, I would say, make sure you only use it for the amount of money you've already allocated to spend and then pay it off in full. Or use it for a very small, minimal things that are manageable for you, maybe a standing order, or maybe use it to be the one that pays one of your bills and then pay it off in full immediately. That will help you build your credit score without running into debt, because you don't want to be starting to run into debt now before you need the real debt. You just want your credit file to be good. So be sure to research student credit card options because they often have lower limits, but then they're better rates for you. So it's the trade-off, and make sure you're paying it off in full so you're not racking it up. So use it as an extension of your current account and then have a standing order that pays it off in full. You get about 45 to 50 days free in the first when you've made an expense on a card. Make sure you pay it within that time so you're not incurring interest.
So basically, if you use it wisely, it is a good thing, not only because of what I said about the protection, but also you are building that credit file, that credit rating, I suppose, because you're demonstrating that you can handle credit, you can pay it off. I guess that's quite a good thing.
Absolutely.
Show. Now, we've spoken about bank accounts. Let me go to another question here. Itai at the University of Buckingham asks, I haven't set up a UK bank account. Should I do this? What else do I need to know in relation to finances in the UK? I'm guessing, Tynah, that Itai is an overseas student. I know you do a lot with overseas students. Let me just add to that question, though. Is it difficult for someone coming to the UK to open a UK bank account?
Oh, my. That's a whole podcast, Dean.
Does that mean yes?
It is extremely difficult, and it depends. Actually, I feel like students have a slightly easier route in that way. But yes, it can be very difficult. There's so many barriers, but I'll try and unpack this because it's such a key point to unpack, especially with so many challenger banks now offering the options for using your overseas account here. I would say always think long term. If you're intending to stay in the UK for after your student period, you absolutely want to get a UK bank account. One, it helps you understand and set yourself in the setting where you are. It helps you to ground yourself in the way money and the economy in the UK runs. So it makes you part of the fabric in that way. Secondly, and very important for international students to know, is that the UK runs on this thing called a credit file, a credit history. So if you don't have one, they don't at the moment, and for a long time to come, the only credit history that matters to the UK is the UK credit history. Because when I moved to the UK several years ago, I moved here about 16 years ago, I had a credit history where I was coming from that didn't matter, right? I was also coming from a country that was a very heavy cash economy. So the way we account for credit or the way we account for loyalty and ability is very different from here. So as an international student, one of the quickest things you want to do is ground yourself in the economic steading of the place you're at. So I would strongly advise, yes, getting a UK account. I also suggest that it's easy to manage your money easier when you're in the UK. You know what the amount of money is in pounds, and so you're allocating your budget. You know what that 70% is in real time, the 10-10-10 in real time, right? So it grounds you that way. It makes it easier to receive your payments, pay bills, and then it will avoid you having foreign exchange fees, because if you have an international account, you're getting charged every single transaction. Whereas once the money has been exchanged to a UK account, it's all now sitting in that account, and so you're transacting in pounds. So another tip for Atai would be that look into student accounts, because they often come with benefits like 0% overdrafts, which can also help you to build your credit. But be aware of that exchange rate piece that I'm talking about if you're getting your funding from abroad, and also look out for the ones that have a budgeting app connected to them. Absolutely get an account if you can. It's easier for you to get it when you're a student than when you've come in as just an international person. On like myself, I came in on something called an HSMP, which is an expat route. It can be much harder.
Sounds like great advice. I want to end by asking you this: what are the main financial mistakes, if you like, that you see students making?
Well, I would say one of the biggest ones that I find is that we think we have a lot of time. And this is general, not just students. Everyone seems to think you have a lot of time. So you keep thinking, right, I can spend it all today. I'll think about that tomorrow. I'll think about that tomorrow. So putting off financial planning and thinking I'm a student, I can get away with it now. I have this loan coming in is a big one. One of the other common mistakes is overspending, so soon. Again, based on that, you're thinking you have another day. So going to debt really early on for very things that you later on regret. So going into your overdraft for a pint or for a night out, or failing to budget effectively because your pals need you to go to a weekend away, for a weekend, and you're going over your limit, will quickly put you into bad habits. To avoid this, I would say focus on understanding your essentials. And if you do this 70%, this 70-10-10-10, that's one thing I teach when we're working with the students at uni. Make sure that your outings and all your lifestyle things are going into that 70%. It will help you not to go over your budget from the word go.
Brilliant. Just quickly tell us about Moneymatics.
Yes, thank you for asking. So Moneymatics is a financial education company, again, set up, based on what I was saying to you around coming here and finding money was just very different. So we do financial education primarily for youth, students as well, and adults. So we run programs. We come in and just want to have money conversations, make money approachable and fun, but practical. So we run events for the university space. We run something called Money, Munch, and Music, where we come in, we run workshops and days where we just have music, food, and a conversation about money. Practical tips, we're optimizing your money, making sure you're not leaving money on the table, understanding your loans, that type of thing. That's what we do. We also do a lot of work in the corporate world where we are launching a financial inclusion manifesto and that type of thing. But in terms of for this, we do run programs specific for international and local university students.
Brilliant. That sounds fantastic. Tynah, thank you so much. The advice is great as always, and I know that will be well received. And please, I hope you do come back on. This is obviously a topic we all talk about all the time on Uni Chat, because in addition to finding somewhere to live and all of that, people need money and they need to manage their money. And I can see from the amount of questions we had on this topic, this is a big issue. So thanks so much for all of your advice. That's it for this week's podcast, but do join us again next week here on Uni Chat, where we'll be talking about mental health. If you want to join in the discussion, if you want to come onto the podcast, give us your views, your comments, or indeed join the panel, go over to unichatpodcast.co.uk. You'll find out how you can do that. You'll also see that you can WhatsApp us a video or a comment. And again, all the details on how to do that is on the website www.unichatpodcast.co.uk.
Uni Chat, debating the big issues affecting students and providing key advice and tips.